The Outline of History, being a plain history of life and mankind by H.G. Wells, revised and brought up to the end of the Second World War by Raymond Postgate, with maps and plans by J.F. Horrobin, Volume 1. Book 1, The World Before Man. 1. The Earth in Space and Time. Part 1, The Great Expansion of Men's Ideas of Space and Time. 2. The Earth in Space. 3. How long has the Earth endured? Section 1. And first, before we begin the history of life, let us tell something of the stage upon which our drama is put, and of the background against which it is played. In the last few hundred years, there have been an extraordinary enlargement of men's ideas about the visible universe in which they live. At the same time, there has been perhaps a certain diminution in their individual self-importance. They have learnt that they are items in a whole far vaster, more enduring, and more wonderful than their ancestors ever dreamed or suspected. Well, some of the religious references actually still keep up to date. Modern science still hasn't reached a point where they say it's as old or as big as some of these things do, or some other features. 2. A savage and primitive mind. The Earth seems to be the whole flat floor of the universe. The sky is a dome, above it across which the sun and moon and stars pass and pass again, returning by some mysterious roundabout or subterranean route. The Babylonian and Chinese astronomers, after many centuries of star observation, still believed that the Earth was flat. Well, there's Babylonian records that show that they had an idea of the Earth as sort of spherical, and the stars could be seen differently from the 3 different regions. It was the Greek mind which first grasped clearly the spherical form of the world. Well, at that point, it kind of stuck in people's minds that it still was. But even so, it did not apprehend the universe as relatively very large. And of course, it wasn't till the Quran till they had a better idea of the shape of the Earth. Now science is backing it up, that it's not a total sphere, it's kind of like a flattened. The globe of the Earth was the center of being. The sun, the moon, the planets, the fixed stars, moved about it as their center, in crystalline spheres. Well, probably since prehistory, they knew about the precession of the equinoxes. You know, it kind of shifts a degree about every 72 years. It was only in the 15th century that men's minds moved beyond this, and Copernicus made his amazing guess that the sun was the center and not the Earth. It was only with the development of the telescope by Galileo in the opening of the 17th century that the views of Copernicus became widely accepted. The development of the telescope marks indeed a new phase in human thought, a new vision of life. It is an extraordinary thing that the Greeks, with their lively and penetrating minds, never realized the possibilities of either microscope or telescope. They made no use of the lens, yet they lived in a world in which glass had been known and had been made beautiful for hundreds of years. They had about them glass flasks and bottles, through which they must have caught glimpses of things distorted and enlarged. But science in Greece was pursued by philosophers in an aristocratic spirit. One thing about Greek philosophy is they kind of understood the difference, at least some of them, between science and philosophy of science. Men who, with a few such exceptions as the ingenious Archimedes and Hero were too proud to learn from such mere artisans as jewelers and metal and glass workers. Ignorance is the first penalty of pride. The philosopher had no mechanical skill, and the artisan had no philosophical education, and it was left for another age, more than 1,000 years later, to bring together glass and the astronomer. Since the time of Galileo, astronomy and the telescope have advanced together, and a veil of ignorance and false assumptions has been rolled back from the deeps of space. The idea that the sun was the center of the universe has followed the idea that the world was in that position. Well, our universe may not be centered on Earth, but obviously, to some extent, it's going to always remain geocentric. We know now that our sun cannot even be included among the greatest of the stars. It is merely one of the lesser lights. The telescope has realized the human imagination as no other implement has ever done. If there is any other apparatus worthy to be compared to the enlarging influence, it is the spectroscope, which was developed after the discoveries of Fraunhofer, the glassworker, in 1814. Since man has lived on Earth, he has seen rainbows, but who could have told him that those bands of color held in them a promise that one day he should be able to analyze the stars, that the spectroscope receives the rays from any luminous source, passes them through prisms, and breaks them up into rainbow-like bands. These bands reveal, under examination, transverse lines of brightness and darkness, which vary with the heat and the chemical composition of the source of light and of any intervening vapor, so that men can now sit in observatories and learn the composition and take the temperature of stars incalculable billions of miles away. The curtain that hid the unfathomable abyss of stellar distances has been drawn back only in the last 3 centuries. Still more recent is our realization of the immense duration of our universe in time. Among ancient peoples, the Indian philosophers alone seem to have had any perception of the vast ages through which existence has passed in the European world until little more than a century and a half ago. Men's ideas of the time things had lasted were astonishingly brief. There are still people who believe that the world's less than 6,000 years old. In The Universal History, published by a syndicate of booksellers in London in 1779, it is stated that the world was created in 4004 BCE, and with pleasant exactitude at the autumnal equinox, and at the making of man crowned the work of creation at Eden, upon the Euphrates, exactly 2 days' journey above Basra. Now, the Yazidi use a calendar that puts it further back, puts their start of this age further back. You know, what they say, the peacock incarnation of Shaitan happened. Yeah, Malik Taus is known as Shaitan in Avestan, which means cast out of a place. But before that, Gnog Manog, as he's also called in Avestan, was known in snake forms and certain black animal forms. A lot of these were like with white spots above the eyes or the middle of the forehead, sort of. But that's for somewhere else, right? The confidence of these statements arose from a too literal interpretation of the Bible narrative. Well, the Bible, they were trying to compose what they thought was the case from an error of religious authority. Very few, even of the sincerest believers in the inspiration of the Bible, now accept them as matter-of-fact statements, which is somewhat problematic, because how can you say that God taught people something to put in the words? Because inspiration is not just you get an idea and you compose that. No, there's actual spiritual entering of the message, of the provocation, you know. It is the science of geology, and particularly the science of paleontology, which has broken through this time barrier and opened beyond that little yesterday of scarcely 6,000 years, a million such yesterdays. Two main sets of facts, very frequently observed, were forcing themselves upon men's attention long before the 18th century of the Common Era. One was that in innumerable districts one saw exposed great thicknesses of stratified rocks that could only have been accumulated during long periods of time, and that in many cases these strata had been bent, contorted, and thrust about in a way that was inevitably suggestive of enormous forces operating through long periods of time. The other was the existence of fossils similar to, but not precisely like, the bones and skulls and other hard parts of existing species. Now, the fact that we can dig through things and other animals can dig through things and other certain factors, people will say, well, this and this layer and all this stuff is, how is this possible? It's like, well, humans actually go back further than people realize, a lot further. And they discover it's more like 11 million years now. When I was in college, there was the discovery of 7 million years. But when I graduated high school, it was only 2 million years. So it was only in the 18th century that strata and fossils began to be studied systematically. It is only in the 19th that the recognition of the real scale and quality of these accumulations, the record of the rocks, became widespread. There was a great struggle to establish the authority of the record against the prejudices of those to whom a strictly literal interpretation of the Bible was dear. Many men, still living, took an active part in that great emancipation of the human mind. Gradually, the perspectives of mankind changed and elongated. 200 years ago, the imagination of our race had a background of 6,000 years. Now that curtain has risen also, and men look back to a past of scores and hundreds of millions of years. Section 2. We will now summarize very compactly what is known of the material dimensions of our world. Our Earth, it has been shown, is a spinning globe. Vast though it seems to us, it is a mere speck of matter in the greater vastness of space. Space is, for the most part, emptiness. At great intervals in this emptiness, there are flaring centers of heat and light. The fixed stars, they are all moving about in space, notwithstanding that they are called fixed stars. But for a long time, men did not realize their motion. They are so vast and at such tremendous distances that their motion is not perceived. Only in the course of many thousands of years it is appreciable. Scores of centuries ago, the Egyptians made star maps, and they show us that the shapes of the constellations have changed very considerably. Many stars have moved measurably, yet we still use the old, convenient expression, fixed stars, to distinguish them from the planets. These fixed stars are so far off that for all their immensity, they seem to be, even when we look at them through the most powerful telescopes, mere points of light, brighter or less bright. A few, however, when we turn a telescope upon them, are seen to be whorls and clouds of shining vapor, which we call nebulae. They are puffs and smears of luminous stuff, billions of miles in length. They are so far off that a movement of millions of miles would be imperceptible. Now, if Pluto moves against the background and it's larger than, the asteroids and stuff, and so are a couple of others, I think it's fair enough to just admit that they're still, that it's still a planet. Some cultures even believed in 13 planets. I mean, there were different numbers, but we don't really see beyond that. I don't remember anything ever encountering more than belief in 13 planets. I mean, actual planets, and the sun and the moon being different. So, the idea that the 5 planets and the sun and the moon were a planet, So only 5 in reality that they do have most of Western culture for so long. There are also, it has been realized quite recently, a number of dark bodies in space and clouds of opaque matter, some of enormous size. We should still know nothing of their existence if it had not been that they blot out the luminous stars beyond them. One star, however, is so near to us that it is like a great ball of flame. This one is the sun. The sun is itself, in its nature, like a fixed star, but it differs from the other stars in appearance because it is beyond comparison, nearer than they are, and because it is nearer, men have been able to learn something of its nature. Its mean distance from the Earth is about 93 million miles. If you know the exact of any of these, just post it in the comment. It is a mass of flaming matter having a diameter of 866,000 miles. Its bulk is 1.25 times the bulk of our Earth. Many of the fixed stars are vastly greater. These are difficult figures for the imagination. If a bullet fired from a Maxim gun at the sun kept its muzzle velocity unimpaired, it would take 7 years to reach the sun. And yet we say the sun is quite close, measured by the scale of the stars. If the Earth were a small ball 1 inch in diameter, the sun would be a globe of 9 feet diameter. It would fill a small bedroom. We know now that it is spinning round on its axis, but since it is an incandescent fluid, its polar regions do not travel with the same velocity as its equator, the surface of which rotates in about 25 days. The surface visible to us consists of clouds of incandescent metallic vapor. So hot is the sun's atmosphere that iron, nickel, copper, and tin are present in it, in a gaseous state. About what lies below we can only guess. About the sun, at the great distances, circle not only our Earth, but certain other kindred bodies, called the planets. These shine in the sky because they reflect the light of the sun. They are near enough to us to note their movements quite easily. Night by night, their positions change with regard to the fixed stars. It is well to understand how empty of matter is space if, as we have said, the sun were a globe 9 feet across. Our Earth would, in proportion, be the size of a 1-inch ball, and at a distance of 322 yards from the sun, this is over a sixth of a mile. It would mean 3.5 minutes smart walking from the ball to the 9 feet globe. The moon would be a speck the size of a small pea, 30 inches from the Earth, nearer to the sun than the Earth would be 2 other very similar specks, the planets, Mercury and Venus, at a distance of 124 and 232 yards, respectively. Beyond the Earth would come the planets Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto at distances from the Sun of 488, 1,672, 3,067, 6,169, 9,666, and 13,300 yards, respectively. From the Sun to Neptune would be a 2-hour walk. There would also be a certain number of very much smaller specks flying about amongst these planets, more particularly a number called the asteroids, circling between Mars and Jupiter, and occasionally a little puff or more or less luminous vapor and dust would drift into the system from the almost limitless emptiness beyond. Such a puff is what we call a comet. All the rest of the space about us and around us for unfathomable distances beyond is cold, lifeless, and void. The nearest fixed star to us on this minute scale, be it remembered, the Earth as a 1-inch ball and the moon a little pea, would be over 40,000 miles away. Most of the fixed stars we see would still be on this scale scores and hundreds of millions of miles off. Now let us come back to the Earth. The diameter of our world is a little under 8,000 miles. Its surface is rough. The more projecting parts of the roughness are mountains, and in the hollows of its surface there is a film of water, the oceans and seas. This film of water is about 5 miles thick at its deepest part. That is to say, the deepest oceans have a depth of 5 miles. This is very little in comparison with the bulk of the world. About this sphere is a thin covering of air, the atmosphere. As we ascend in a balloon or go up in a mountain, the air is continually less dense until it becomes too thin to support life. At a height of 20 miles, there is scarcely any air at all. The highest point to which a bird can fly is about 4 miles up. The condor, it is said, can struggle up to that, but most small birds and insects which are carried up by airplanes or balloons drop off insensible at a much lower level, and the greatest height to which any mountaineer has ever climbed is about 5 miles. Men have flown in airplanes to a height of over 7 miles, and balloons with men in them have reached very nearly 7 miles, but at the cost of considerable physical suffering. Small experimental balloons, containing not men but recording instruments, have gone as high as 23 miles. It is only in the upper few hundred feet of the crust of the earth, in the sea, and at the lower levels of the air, below 4 miles, that life is found. We do not know of any life at all except in these really very shallow films of air and water upon our planet. So far as we know, all the rest of space is as yet without life. Scientific men have discussed the possibility of life or of some process of a similar kind occurring upon such kindred bodies as the planets Venus and Mars, but they point merely to questionable possibilities. Section 3. So much for the Earth and space. Let us now consider our subject from the point of view of time. In Arabic, the god of time, name of God, is Ad-Dahr. And the Celts and other Teutonic people, that was a divine name that they had more than a lot of cultures. Now let us consider our subject from the point of view of time. Astronomers and geologists and those who study physics are now able to tell us something of the origin of the Earth. They consider that, vast ages ago, the sun was a spinning, flaring mass of matter, not yet concentrated into a compact center of heat and light, considerably larger than it is now, and spinning very much faster, and that, as it whirled, a series of fragments were detached from it by the nearest approach of some other body flying through space, and that those torn-off fragments become the planets. Well, there's also the consolidation into a sun, and some fragments don't quite get pulled into the sun, into the star itself. Our Earth is one of these planets, while our Earth would have had to come from another solar system because our sun isn't of the sort that would have produced the metals that the Earth contains. The flaring mass that was the material of the Earth broke into two masses as it spun, a larger, the Earth itself, and a smaller, which is now the dead, still moon. Astronomers give us convincing reasons for supposing that the sun and Earth and moon and all that system were then whirling about at a speed much greater than their speed today, and that at first our Earth was a flaming thing upon which no life could live. They oblige us to believe that the sun, incandescent though it is now much cooler than it was, and that it spins more slowly now than it did. And the moon spins, so there is no dark side of the Earth, thank you very much. There's no dark side of the moon as far as some permanently dark side of the moon. And that it continues to cool and slow down. And they also show that the rate at which the Earth spins is diminishing and continues to diminish. That is to say, that our day is growing longer and longer, and that the heat at the center of the earth wastes slowly. There was a time when a day was not a half and not a third of what it is today, when a blazing hot sun, much greater than it is now, must have moved visibly, had there been an eye to mark it, from its rise to its setting across the skies. There will be a time when the day will be as long as a year is now, and the cooling sun, shorn of its beams, will hang motionless in the heavens. Well, even longer is possible if the Earth's rotation slows down to that degree, or, some other factors. How long, some reader will ask, has the world endured? That is a question which has attracted much attention in the last few years. Gradually, the earlier estimates, which varied very widely, have been brought toward agreement. Astronomers and mathematicians who base their computations on the rate of cooling of celestial bodies and in various processes of diffusion and atomic change give us 2,000 million years. Okay, well, 2 billion years is the age of the Earth. Now, they say something, I forget what it was, something between 4 and 5 billion, as a body separate from the sun, and about 300 million years is the length of time since life appeared on it. Well, they now say it's about 2, 3 billion years for life in any abundance. Well, microscopic life and like algae or something, right? The age of the sun as a star is now supposed to be somewhere in the nature of 5 million years. The Earth, says Sir James Jeans in his Universe Around Us, will in all probability go on for another million years, and then its equatorial temperature may be sinking to Arctic conditions. Since man has existed as a self-conscious social creature for only 30,000 years or less, this gives him illimitable opportunity for the attainment of knowledge and power. Long before he reaches that limit, he may make himself master of time and space. Now, around 40,000 years ago, people started making about 200 vocal sounds, and those over 200 vocal sounds are what all the people on Earth are capable of. I mean, somebody may have some injury or something, and they're not capable of that, but so anatomically modern human in that sense. Anatomically modern human in another sense, where the hair was more separate from the top half to the bottom half. You had, the body, and that happened more recently. But civilization 2 million years ago in Africa is very, very apparent. Cave art. Some of it goes back that far in some places. Most of it, almost all of it's more recent than the 30,000 year point. Hundreds of thousands of years throughout what they say the old world. There's just, and the earliest humans in the Hindu Kush Himalayan, they seem to have some sense of symbolic things, so in terms of the markings that they left. So I would say, civilization started with humanity. So calling Adam, civilized man, that totally made sense.